The night began with a soft hum in the air, the kind that only appears in places where thousands of hopes and expectations gather under the same ceiling. It was the annual Hollywood Unity Awards, a show known not just for glamour, but for honoring kindness, respect, and the human heart behind famous faces. The backstage area was filled with running crew members, flashing screens, and the muted echoes of the audience outside waiting for the show to begin. But even in all that noise, even in the rush of cables, lights, and whispered instructions, there was a strange tension that nobody could name. It was not dangerous. It was not heavy. It was simply the feeling that something meaningful was about to happen, and somehow the air knew it before anyone else did. Keanu Reeves had arrived earlier than planned, something that surprised the crew because he was usually exactly on time and never complicated. He had walked in quietly, greeting everyone with that gentle smile that made people feel respected without needing any long conversation. His calm presence stood out in a space full of pressure and high expectations. He carried himself with a peaceful strength, as if he had learned long ago that noise does not create importance. The truth was, he had been thinking deeply that entire day. He had been rehearsing words in his head, but not for a speech. They were words he had kept inside for many years, words he tried to bury each time work demanded focus. But time has a strange way of pushing feelings back to the surface, especially when they were never meant to stay hidden. On the other side of the backstage hall, Sandra Bullock was finishing a fitting for her gown. She had arrived with her usual warm energy, joking with the stylists and thanking each person who adjusted even the smallest detail. She breathed life into every room she entered, yet tonight she carried a quiet weight in her chest that she had not spoken to anyone about. She felt the pressure of the night in a different way, like something old was waking up inside her. She tried to push it away, telling herself it was just nerves and nothing more. But deep down she knew it was connected to a moment she shared years ago, a moment she never told the world about, a moment she always wondered if she should have handled differently. The two of them had not worked together in years. They saw each other at events, smiled, hugged, talked about life in short fragments, and then drifted back into their separate worlds. But every reunion, even the small ones, left a quiet echo in the air. They both felt it. They both ignored it. They both pretended it was only nostalgia. But nostalgia does not make your heart race. Nostalgia does not make you look away to hide emotion. Nostalgia does not make you feel like time stops when the other person walks into the room. A backstage camera crew was setting up small mounted devices along the hallway, documenting behind-the-scenes moments for the event's official channel. The cameras were meant to capture natural interactions, nothing dramatic or invasive. But nobody expected the footage to become the most talked-about video of the year. Nobody imagined the cameras would catch a moment that neither Keanu nor Sandra saw coming, a moment that would stir millions of hearts around the world. Keanu was walking slowly down the quiet corridor, hands in his pockets, head slightly lowered as if thinking something important. He stopped near a wall covered with old posters from past award shows. For a few seconds he stared at them, almost as if he was searching for something in the memories they represented. His breathing grew deeper, and he whispered something to himself, words the camera didn't catch but clearly weighed heavy on his mind. Then he lifted his head and froze. Sandra turned the corner at the exact same moment. She was adjusting her bracelet, smiling softly with the kind of distracted focus people have when preparing for something meaningful. She didn't see him at first, but when she lifted her eyes and met his, everything around them seemed to pause. The lights above flickered slightly. The hallway crew, busy with tasks, slowed but did not interrupt. The air grew warmer, heavier, as if emotion had wrapped itself around both of them. Sandra let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. There was surprise in her eyes, but also something deeper, something she had not shown him in years. Keanu stepped forward very gently, his face softening with a warmth that reached his eyes, a warmth that revealed how much he had missed seeing her like this, without cameras, without noise, without distance. "Hey," she whispered, her voice quiet but full of meaning. "Hey," he answered, and his tone carried something she felt more than she understood. Their steps brought them closer until only a few inches separated them. The camera above, unnoticed by both of them, captured every detail. The way Sandra's eyes glistened slightly, the way Keanu's shoulders relaxed for the first time that evening, the subtle tremble of energy between two people who had always respected each other yet never fully expressed their truth. But then something unexpected happened. Sandra looked at him with a soft, trembling smile, the kind that appears only when a person is fighting an emotion too strong to hide. And Keanu noticed instantly. He stepped even closer, lowering his voice. "You okay?" he asked, with genuine care that made her chest tighten. Her smile weakened, and for a moment she looked away as if trying to steady her breath. "I thought I was," she whispered. Keanu's expression changed. There was fear there now. Quiet, careful fear. The fear of something unsaid. The fear of losing something before he even had the courage to reach for it. He took a slow breath and opened his mouth to speak, but before he could say anything, Sandra reached out and lightly touched his wrist. The touch was soft, quick, but powerful. He felt it like a spark. And then she said something he never expected to hear. "Keanu, we need to talk. There's something I should have told you a long time ago." His heart dropped, not from worry, but from the weight of everything he had held inside for years. He stepped closer, his voice almost a whisper. "Sandra, I need to tell you something too." They looked into each other's eyes, both afraid of what the next moment might bring, both aware that whatever happened next might change everything. And just as Sandra opened her mouth to speak, a stage manager suddenly called from the distance, "We need Sandra on standby in 10 seconds. She flinched, Keanu froze. She looked at him, torn between duty and emotion, and he looked back as if silently begging for just one more second. But she stepped back. "After the show," she whispered. Keanu nodded slowly, his eyes locked on hers, carrying all the words he still couldn't say. And then she walked away. But the camera kept rolling, and what it captured in the next 5 seconds would soon explode across the internet, leaving everyone guessing what really happened between them, and why Keanu Reeves suddenly looked as if he had just realized something that could no longer be hidden. The moment Sandra walked away, the hallway seemed to lose its balance. Keanu stood completely still, listening to the fading sound of her footsteps, as if they were echoes of something he feared losing again. He tried to steady his breathing, but he could still feel the warmth of her touch on his wrist, a touch so gentle yet strong enough to pull buried memories out of hiding. He wanted to call her name, to ask her to stay just a few more seconds, but the world around them was moving too fast. Stage calls, crew members rushing, lights flickering, everything pushed forward while he stayed anchored in the same place, trapped between what he felt and what he feared. As the show continued on stage, Keanu moved deeper into the backstage area, trying to gather himself. The noise grew louder, but his mind was strangely quiet, almost empty, like he had stepped into a part of himself he rarely allowed others to see. He found a corner near the dressing rooms, away from cameras and away from the crew. He leaned against the wall and closed his eyes. He replayed her words in his head again and again. She needed to tell him something, something important. Something from a long time ago. And he needed to tell her something too, something he had carried for years like a shadow that followed him no matter how bright the world around him became. But blocked emotions come with their own kind of pressure. As he stood alone, he realized how tired he was of silence. Tired of pretending that the connection he felt with Sandra was nothing but friendship. Tired of stepping away whenever he felt too close. Tired of choosing distance over honesty. Tonight felt different because tonight she had almost said something first. That small detail changed everything for him. It made him believe that maybe he had not imagined the quiet bond between them. Maybe she had carried her own unsaid truth all this time too. Meanwhile, Sandra was standing just behind the stage curtain waiting for her cue. Her heart was beating too fast for someone who had done this job for decades. She lifted her hand to her chest, trying to calm herself, but her fingers trembled. She was not afraid of the audience or the cameras. She was afraid of what she had seen in Keanu's eyes. There had been something unguarded there, something vulnerable. She had seen it only once before, many years ago, during a long conversation they shared after filming a late-night scene. She never forgot it, because it was the same night she realized she cared for him in a way she wasn't ready to admit, not even to herself. She told herself that time would weaken the feeling. That life would push them in different directions and the emotion would fade. But seeing him tonight made it clear the feeling had never weakened. It had only learned to hide. And now, after all these years, the world had placed them in a quiet hallway where nothing could protect them from the truth anymore. She wanted to talk to him immediately, to tell him everything she had carried inside. But the interruption pulled her away again, and she hated how easily she let duty swallow her courage. The host's voice echoed from the stage, and Sandra lifted her head. She walked forward when her name was called, stepping into the bright lights with a practiced smile. But even as she delivered her lines, performed her segment, and charmed the audience like she always did, her mind kept drifting back to the hallway. She remembered how close he had stepped. She remembered the softness in his eyes. She remembered the quiet, almost fearful way he said he needed to tell her something too. That one sentence had shaken her more than she expected. After her segment ended, she walked backstage again, but she didn't see him. Part of her felt relief because she wasn't emotionally steady enough to face him yet. But another part of her, a much louder part, felt a deep ache of disappointment. She wanted to find him. She needed to find him. She needed to say what she'd held inside for too long. But she also feared that if she found him too soon, the courage she felt might scatter into pieces. Keanu, however, had seen her pass by. He had stepped out of hiding, watching from a distance as she moved through the hallway surrounded by people. She smiled at them, thanked them, spoke politely, and carried herself with her usual kindness. But he could see through the mask. He could always tell when she was pretending to be calm. Tonight she was pretending very hard. He waited until the people around her moved away, then he walked toward her with slow, steady steps, not wanting to overwhelm her. When she saw him, her eyes widened for a second and then softened, as if relieved but also afraid of what might come next. "Hey," he said gently, a little out of breath though he had no reason to be. She nodded, "Hey." There was a long pause, the kind that fills the air with unspoken things. Both of them searched for words but found the moment too fragile to rush. Sandra finally sighed and looked away for a second before speaking. "Keanu, about what I said earlier," she began softly, her voice trembling just enough for him to notice. "I meant it. I should have told you something a long time ago." He stepped closer, lowering his head slightly so she would feel safer speaking. "I know," he whispered, "and I want to hear it." Her lips parted, but before she could say another word, one of the assistant producers rushed toward them and said, "Keanu, we need you on standby now. You're up next." And once again, the moment shattered. Keanu's shoulders tensed. Sandra closed her eyes in frustration. Every interruption felt like the universe was afraid of their truth. But Keanu didn't step away this time. Instead, he leaned closer until only she could hear him and whispered, "Please don't leave after the show. Stay. Let's talk. I can't lose this moment again." Sandra opened her eyes and met his gaze. There was fear there, but also an unexpected strength. She nodded slowly. "I'll stay." Those words comforted him more than she realized. He gave her one last look, filled with emotion he could no longer hide, then turned to walk toward the stage. But something inside Sandra shifted as she watched him go. It was a feeling she couldn't name at first, but it grew stronger with every step he took away from her. Something in her chest tightened, like old memories were waking up, memories she tried so hard to forget. She pressed her hand to her heart again, trying to steady the uncomfortable heaviness rising within her. She whispered to herself, "Not tonight, please, not tonight." But the heaviness didn't fade. It grew, and the camera above them captured all of it. Keanu stepped onto the stage, greeted by applause that filled the entire hall. The lights washed over him, the warmth steadier than the emotions running through his body. He delivered his speech with grace and authenticity, but throughout the entire moment, his thoughts drifted back to Sandra. He wondered what her truth was. He wondered if it matched his own. He wondered if she felt the same fear he did. Each second spent under the lights felt like a countdown to whatever they would finally say to each other. When he finished and walked backstage again, he expected to find her waiting somewhere near the wings or the hallway. He scanned the area, looking for her familiar presence. But she wasn't there. He asked a stagehand if they had seen her. They pointed toward the dressing rooms and said she had gone back there a few minutes earlier. Relief washed over him. He walked quickly toward the dressing room corridor, ready to finally hear the truth she had held for so long. But when he reached her door, something felt wrong. The handle was slightly open and the lights inside were still on. He knocked gently. No answer. He pushed the door open more and stepped inside. The room was empty. Her bag remained on the chair. Her jacket hung on the wall. Her bracelet, the same one she had been adjusting earlier, lay on the table as if she had removed it in a hurry. But she was nowhere in sight. Keanu felt his breath catch in his throat. He stepped further in, scanning the space for any sign of where she might have gone. Everything looked normal except for one detail. Her phone was still on the counter. Sandra never left her phone behind, especially not at an event like this. A soft knock came from behind him. He turned to see one of the crew members standing in the doorway, looking uneasy. "Are you looking for Sandra?" the crew member asked quietly. Keanu nodded, trying not to sound alarmed. "Yeah, have you seen her?" The crew member hesitated, glanced down the hallway, then back at him. I saw her walking toward the far exit about 10 minutes ago. She looked different, like she was in a hurry, and she was holding her chest like something was hurting. Keanu's entire body went cold. "What do you mean hurting?" he asked, his voice suddenly sharper. The crew member shrugged helplessly. "I don't know, but she didn't look okay." Keanu stepped past them, his heartbeat rising, his mind racing through fear, confusion, responsibility, and emotion he had been trying to confess all night. He walked quickly toward the hallway the crew member pointed to, praying she was still somewhere nearby. But as he reached the corner, the mounted backstage camera above him captured a moment the world would replay millions of times later. Keanu stopped suddenly, and his face fell into pure fear. Because at the far end of the hallway, Sandra Bullock was no longer standing. She was on the floor, and she wasn't moving the moment Keanu saw Sandra lying on the floor. Something inside him broke open. He didn't shout, he didn't panic loudly, but his entire body moved with a desperate speed he had never felt before. He rushed down the hallway, the sound of his footsteps echoing sharply against the walls as he dropped to his knees beside her. His hands trembled when he reached toward her, afraid of what he might discover. The lights above flickered softly, casting shifting shadows across her still form, making the moment feel unreal, like a scene he never imagined he would witness. He whispered her name in a voice so fragile it barely sounded like him, as if saying it too loudly might shatter what little stability he had left inside. Sandra lay with her back against the cold floor, her head slightly turned to the side, her breathing shallow and uneven. Her hand was pressed to her chest, the same place she had touched earlier backstage. Her bracelet, the one she left behind in her dressing room, felt like a symbol now, a sign that she had been struggling long before anyone noticed. Keanu gently touched her shoulder, trying to steady his own shaking breath. He repeated her name, this time a little louder, filled with concern that tightened around his chest like a grip he could not escape. Her eyes fluttered weakly, but she did not fully open them. She looked like she was fading in and out of awareness, like she was caught in a space between strength and collapse. Keanu felt a rush of fear so strong it made him lean even closer, placing one hand behind her back to lift her slightly so she would not be lying completely flat. Everything around him grew quiet, the noise of the show, the crew members, the distant applause. All of it disappeared until there was only Sandra and the rise and fall of her fragile breath. "I'm here," he whispered, trying to steady her. "Sandra, I'm right here. Open your eyes, please." She finally opened them, but only halfway. The confusion in her gaze broke him. She tried to speak, but her voice came out weak and strained, almost like a breath instead of words. He leaned closer, trying to hear, but she couldn't form a full sentence. Instead, she lifted her hand slightly, reaching for him with a trembling motion that made his heart ache. He took her hand gently, holding it between both of his as if trying to transfer his strength into her body. A crew member who saw the scene rushed to call for medical staff, but Keanu barely noticed. His focus stayed on her completely. He had never felt this helpless before. He was used to solving problems, staying calm, taking care of others. But tonight, with Sandra in his arms, he felt the weight of every moment he had stayed silent, every feeling he pushed away, every word he never said. It all crashed into him at once, leaving him both terrified and painfully aware of how much she meant to him. Sandra tried again to speak, her lips parting slightly. Keanu leaned in, desperate to hear anything she wanted to say. Her voice was barely audible, but he caught fragments. "I didn't want you to worry." He shook his head immediately, his voice breaking. "I always worry about you. You never have to hide anything from me." Her eyes softened for a moment, and tears gathered at the corners. She blinked slowly, and the sight of her struggling so much tore something inside him that he could not repair. He squeezed her hand gently, trying to remind her she wasn't alone, that he would not let go no matter what happened. The medical team arrived with equipment, and they approached cautiously when they saw Keanu holding her. He looked up at them, his expression full of urgency but not aggression. He didn't want to move away from her. He didn't want to let go, but they needed space to help her, and he understood that even though every part of him resisted it. One of the medics spoke softly. "Sir, we need to check her breathing and heart rate. Can you help us lift her slightly?" Keanu nodded, though his throat felt tight. He gently shifted Sandra's upper body, lifting her enough for the medic to slide a small support under her back. When he placed her down, she winced, and Keanu felt his stomach twist. He kept his hand on hers the entire time, not willing to give her even a moment without his presence. The medics asked her simple questions. Could she hear them? Could she breathe? Could she move her fingers? She responded slowly, but the effort seemed to drain her. They checked her pulse, her oxygen levels, and her eyes for signs of fatigue or strain. One of the medics looked at her chest for a moment longer than the others, then exchanged a quiet, serious glance with his partner. Keanu noticed it instantly. "What does that mean?" he asked quietly, his voice shaking. The medic hesitated. "Her pulse is irregular. Her breathing is unstable. We need to get her seen immediately. We don't want to wait." Keanu felt dread crawl into his stomach. He asked, "Has this happened before? Did she say anything earlier?" His voice lowered, almost as if he feared the answer. The medic shook his head. "We won't know until we run tests, but sir, she shouldn't have been walking around feeling like this." Then he added more carefully, "She must have been pushing through discomfort for a while." Keanu closed his eyes briefly, guilt slicing through him. He thought about the moments earlier that evening, how she had placed her hand on her chest, how she seemed distracted, how she had said she thought she was okay. He wished he had said something then. He wished he hadn't let her walk away so quickly. They prepared a stretcher, but when they tried to lift her, Sandra looked up at Keanu with panic in her eyes, as if afraid of being separated from him. He stepped closer immediately, placing his hand gently against the side of her face. "I'm not leaving," he whispered. "I'll be right next to you, I promise." Her breathing eased slightly after hearing that. The medics lifted her carefully, and Keanu followed closely as they guided the stretcher through the hallway. Several crew members and security staff stepped aside quickly, surprised to see Sandra in such a vulnerable state, and Keanu walking by her side with a focus that was almost painful to witness. They were approaching the exit when Sandra reached out again with her trembling hand. Keanu saw it instantly and rushed to her side, brushing his fingers lightly against hers until she found his hand again. She squeezed weakly, and he felt a sharp ache in his chest. He leaned down, wanting to reassure her, wanting her to feel safe. But then she whispered something that made him stop breathing for a moment. "I didn't tell you because I was scared." He froze, leaning even closer. "Scared of what?" Her eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained faint. "Scared you would walk away." Those words pierced him deeper than anything he had felt in years. He shook his head gently, tears forming in his own eyes for the first time that night. "I would never walk away from you," he whispered. "Never." She closed her eyes at his words, as if finally letting herself believe them. The medics continued guiding her toward the exit, and Keanu stayed close until they reached the ambulance waiting outside. The cool night air brushed against his face, grounding him slightly, though his heart still raced in fear. As they prepared to lift her into the ambulance, Sandra opened her eyes again and looked at him with a mixture of sadness and longing. "Keanu, there's more," she whispered. He nodded quickly. "Tell me, please." She inhaled slowly, but her breath caught halfway, and the medics instructed her not to push herself to talk yet. She shook her head weakly, frustrated that her voice couldn't keep up with her emotions. Keanu touched her hand again. "I'm not going anywhere," he whispered. "You can tell me everything, just breathe." Her eyes softened once more. But then, just as they were about to place her fully into the ambulance, her body tensed suddenly. A sharp pain crossed her face, and her breathing spiked wildly. The monitors in the medic's hands beeped faster, sending a bolt of fear through everyone nearby. "Her heart rate is spiking," one medic shouted. Keanu's entire body went cold. They rushed to stabilize her, giving her oxygen and calling for additional support. Keanu could only watch, helpless but refusing to step back. The scene unfolded under bright streetlights, the air filled with urgency and fear. Sandra's eyes fluttered open for a brief moment, and she stared at him with a look that held both fear and deep emotion. He leaned close again, desperate to reach her. She whispered one final line before her breathing faltered. "I should have told you before tonight." Her voice broke, and then her eyes closed again. "She's losing consciousness," a medic yelled. Keanu reached for her hand, gripping it with a tremble he couldn't hide. The camera mounted near the exit, quiet, unnoticed, recording, captured every second the ambulance ride felt like a blur wrapped in fear. Keanu sat inside beside Sandra, refusing to let anyone convince him to ride separately. He held her hand tightly, even when one of the medics suggested giving her space. He didn't raise his voice or argue, but the look in his eyes made it clear he would not let go. The medic backed off, understanding that sometimes emotional grounding could help a patient stay steady. The moment the doors closed and the ambulance pulled away, a long, heavy silence filled the space. The only sounds were the pulse monitor, the oxygen mask, and the constant hum of the siren outside. Sandra's breathing was uneven. Her eyelids fluttered occasionally, but she didn't fully wake. Her fingers twitched now and then, but she didn't squeeze his hand like before. Keanu kept rubbing her palm gently with his thumb, hoping she could feel even a small part of his presence. He wanted to speak to her, but his throat was too tight. Every word he practiced for years, every confession he imagined sharing, felt meaningless against the fear of losing her. He leaned forward, his forehead almost touching her hand, whispering silently to himself, praying she would open her eyes again. The medics worked quickly, checking her vitals, adjusting oxygen levels, monitoring her heart. One of them glanced at Keanu with sympathy, sensing his fear. "She's stable for now," he said quietly. "We'll know more once we run tests at the hospital. This could be exhaustion, stress, or something deeper. We won't know yet." Keanu nodded, but the words didn't ease his anxiety. He felt guilt wrapping around him like a chain. He kept replaying the evening, wondering if he had missed signs, wondering if his presence or silence had somehow added pressure she didn't need. But he also couldn't ignore her words before she lost consciousness. She had been scared he would walk away. She had been holding something inside. She had been hurting emotionally and physically, and he had no idea. He lifted his head slowly, his eyes fixed on her face. She looked peaceful in a way that frightened him because peace wasn't supposed to arrive like this. Peace wasn't supposed to come with oxygen masks and monitors. Peace wasn't supposed to hide a battle inside her heart. He gently brushed a strand of hair away from her forehead, the gesture soft, protective, and filled with emotion he could no longer bury. The ambulance arrived at the hospital and medical staff rushed her inside. Keanu followed closely, ignoring the flashes of cameras that had gathered outside the entrance. Word had already begun to spread. People saw him leaving the award show in an ambulance with Sandra, and rumors spread like fire. But none of that mattered to him. He didn't care about attention. He didn't care about headlines. He cared only about the woman being rolled through hospital doors, fighting for breath. They moved her into a room and asked him to wait outside. He didn't want to, but he stepped back because he knew they needed space. He stood in the hallway, his back against the wall, his eyes fixed on the door as if staring at it hard enough might pull her safely back to him. Minutes passed, then more minutes. Time felt strange, like it was both moving quickly and not moving at all. A nurse approached him gently. "Sir, we're doing everything we can. She's in good hands. We'll update you soon." He nodded, but his hands were shaking. He stepped away from the wall and began pacing the hallway. He felt restless, anxious, filled with a storm of emotions he had spent years keeping quiet. He didn't want to cry, but tears built up in his eyes, blurring his vision. He wiped them away quickly, not because he was embarrassed, but because he didn't want his vision to distort the moment she finally walked back through that door. After a long wait, a doctor came out. Keanu stopped pacing immediately and walked toward him. "Is she all right?" Keanu asked, voice trembling. The doctor spoke carefully. "She's stable now. Her heart rate has returned to normal, but she experienced a severe stress-induced episode. Her body has been under pressure for quite some time." Keanu felt his stomach twist. Pressure from what? The doctor sighed. "Emotional strain, exhaustion, and from what we can see, she's been pushing herself too hard physically, too. This didn't happen suddenly. Her body has been giving warning signs for weeks, maybe months." Keanu closed his eyes for a brief moment, fighting the guilt inside him. She had been struggling alone. She had been carrying something heavy, something she never told him. He opened his eyes and asked softly, "Can I see her?" The doctor nodded. "She's awake but still weak. Speak gently, avoid overwhelming her." Keanu took a deep breath and walked toward her room. His heart pounded painfully, each step filled with fear and hope. When he opened the door, he saw Sandra lying in the hospital bed, her face pale, her eyes half open but clearer than before. Monitors beeped softly beside her. The room felt still, like a fragile bubble that might burst with the wrong movement. Sandra turned her head and saw him. Her lips curved slightly into a weak, tired smile. "You stayed," she whispered. The sound of her voice nearly brought him to tears, but he held himself steady. He walked to her bedside and sat down slowly. "Of course I stayed," he whispered. "I'm not leaving you." She studied his face, her expression softening. But there was sadness in her eyes, too. A sadness he didn't understand yet. She reached out her hand, and he took it gently. Her fingers were cold, but her touch still carried warmth. "Keanu, I'm sorry," she said slowly. He shook his head immediately. "You have nothing to be sorry for." but she closed her eyes, shaking her head slightly. Yes, I do. I should have told you sooner. I should have told anyone, but I kept pretending I was fine. I didn't want to worry you. I didn't want to change things between us. Keanu leaned closer, his voice soft but firm. Nothing you say can change the way I feel. Nothing. Her breath hitched slightly. She opened her eyes and looked into his with an emotion so deep he felt it in his chest. You say that, but you don't know what I've been hiding. He squeezed her hand gently. Then tell me, please. She took a slow, shaky breath. I didn't collapse because of the award show. I didn't collapse because of stress alone. There's something else, something the doctors already saw in the scans they took, something I've known for a while. Keanu's heart paused. Sandra looked down, avoiding his eyes. I didn't tell you before because I knew if I said the words out loud, everything would change. The way you look at me, the way you treat me, the way you worry, and I didn't want to burden you. Keanu's voice came out almost broken. What are you talking about? Sandra swallowed hard, tears filling her eyes. Keanu, I've been dealing with a medical condition, something I found out months ago. I thought I could manage it quietly. I thought it wasn't serious at first, but it's been getting worse. And tonight, my body finally couldn't hide it anymore. He stared at her, fear pressing intensely against his ribs. What condition? He whispered. She looked at him slowly, her voice trembling as she spoke. I didn't want to tell you until I understood it myself. But the truth is, I may have a heart problem, something the doctors want to confirm, something that could get worse if I don't take it seriously, something I should have told you long before tonight. Keanu's eyes widened in shock and heartbreak. He felt the air leave his lungs, his chest tightening painfully. He leaned closer, gripping her hand carefully as if she might disappear if he let go. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, his voice breaking. She looked away, tears sliding down her cheeks. Because I didn't want you to look at me like I was fragile, or sick, or someone you had to protect. I didn't want my condition to become something that pushed you away. Keanu exhaled sharply, unable to understand how she could think he would ever walk away. He reached out and gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb, his touch lingering softly. Sandra, you are not a burden. You could never be a burden. If anything, I'm the one who should apologize for not seeing that you were struggling. She shook her head weakly. No, this isn't your fault. It's mine for hiding it. I didn't want you to feel responsible for me. I didn't want you to feel trapped. His hand tightened around hers, emotion filling every part of him. I don't feel trapped. I feel scared. Scared because I almost lost you tonight. Scared because you've been carrying this alone. Scared because I don't know what I would do if you weren't here. Her eyes widened slightly, surprise flickering across her tired expression. Keanu, she whispered. He leaned even closer, his voice trembling with honesty he could no longer hide. I care about you more than you think, more than I've ever said, and I'm not leaving, not now, not ever. Sandra stared at him, breathing unevenly. Her lips trembled as though she wanted to say something, something meaningful, something true. But before she could speak, the monitor beside her began to beep faster. Keanu turned sharply, fear flooding him again. Sandra's breathing grew shallow, her eyes unfocused, her hand tightening weakly around his. The door burst open, and nurses rushed in. Her heart rhythm is irregular again, one shouted. Keanu stood up instantly, refusing to move too far away. But a nurse gently touched his arm. Sir, we need space. Please step back just a little. He stepped back, but only by inches, his eyes never leaving Sandra as she struggled to breathe. Her eyes found his one last time, filled with fear and something deeper. She mouthed something he couldn't fully hear. It looked like, please don't leave her. Then her body went still. The monitor alarm blared, and Keanu felt the world collapse around him the moment Sandra's body went still. Keanu felt something inside him tear open in a way he had never experienced before. The piercing alarm from the monitor echoed through the small hospital room, bouncing off the walls like a scream he couldn't silence. Nurses and doctors rushed toward her, their movements urgent and practiced, yet to Keanu everything looked chaotic and terrifying. He pressed a hand to his chest as if trying to steady his heart, but the panic inside him only grew stronger. For a second he couldn't breathe. He could barely even think. All he saw was Sandra, motionless, fragile, and slipping away from him. A nurse gently pushed him back further. "Sir, please give us space. We're doing everything we can." Keanu didn't argue. He didn't speak. He didn't move more than he was forced to. He stood just inside the doorway, gripping the frame with a trembling hand as doctors worked rapidly. He watched them attach pads to her chest, adjust wires, call out orders, check her pulse. One doctor leaned over Sandra, speaking in quick, controlled tones that Keanu couldn't fully understand through the fog of his fear. "Prepare for defibrillation." The words made his legs weaken. Keanu felt his heart collapse into a tight knot. He wanted to rush to her side, to hold her, to wake her, to do anything, to stop this moment from becoming something final. But he couldn't. All he could do was stand there and feel every layer of denial, grief, and love crashing through him like waves that refused to stop. When the doctor delivered the first shock, Sandra's body lifted slightly from the bed. Keanu flinched, his stomach twisting violently. The room filled with tension, electricity, and fear. They checked the monitor. Nothing changed. Charging again. Keanu gripped the doorway harder, his knuckles turning pale. He whispered her name under his breath, over and over, as if calling her back would anchor her to the world. The second shock came. Another jolt, another rise of her body, another painful pause. Still nothing. His breath shook. His eyes burned. Tears clung to his eyelashes but refused to fall, as if even they were frozen in fear. A nurse glanced at him, seeing the devastation on his face, and murmured gently, "She's fighting. Don't lose hope." But Keanu wasn't sure hope was something he could hold anymore. He felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, watching the one person who mattered most slip through his fingers. They delivered a third shock. This time the monitor beeped once, then again. Then slowly, steadily, it returned to a recognizable rhythm. Keanu's knees weakened so suddenly he had to brace himself against the wall to keep from collapsing. A breath he didn't know he'd been holding escaped his chest in a painful rush. He pressed a hand over his face, overwhelmed by relief so intense it hurt. The doctors continued stabilizing her. Her heartbeat grew steady again. Her chest rose and fell with the help of the oxygen, each breath slow and delicate but present, alive. After several tense minutes, the doctor finally stepped back and spoke calmly to the team. "Her heart responded. She's stable for now, but she needs monitoring. We'll move her to the cardiac unit." Those words echoed like a miracle in Keanu's mind. His shoulders sagged as if the weight of the entire world had been lifted only slightly, but enough to breathe again. He walked forward as much as they allowed, watching Sandra closely. She didn't open her eyes. She didn't speak. But her chest rose and fell, and that alone felt like a small victory. Once the room settled and they prepared to transport her, the doctor approached Keanu. "She had an arrhythmic episode. It's likely tied to the condition she mentioned earlier. We'll need more tests to understand the full picture. She's very lucky you got her here quickly." Keanu exhaled a shaky breath. "Will she be okay?" The doctor paused before answering. "We're hopeful, but we need time to know more." That uncertainty hit Keanu harder than he expected, but he nodded because he had no choice. Hope was fragile, but it was all he had now. They moved her to the cardiac unit, and Keanu followed silently. He never left her side for even a step. The hallway lights passed over both of them, washing everything in a sterile brightness that only made the night feel heavier. The world outside the hospital was buzzing with speculation. Photographers, news blogs, social media, all desperate to know why Keanu Reeves had rushed Sandra Bullock to the hospital. The video of their backstage moment was already circulating online, with millions watching their quiet interaction, analyzing their expressions, their closeness, their unspoken connection. But none of that mattered to him. He didn't care about rumors or attention or the world's fascination with their private pain. He cared only about the woman in the hospital bed, fighting to stay conscious, fighting for breath, fighting without knowing he was breaking inside. When Sandra was finally settled in her room, dimly lit and quiet, Keanu sat beside her. He held her hand again, gently, like it was both powerful and fragile. He watched the steady rise and fall of her chest, watched the soft glow of the monitor reflecting across her face. Hours passed, but he didn't move from the chair. The night was long, too long. The hospital staff encouraged him to rest, to step out, to drink water, anything, but he refused. "I'm not leaving her," he repeated every time. In the early hours of the morning, Sandra stirred. Her eyelids fluttered and Keanu sat up straighter, leaning closer. She opened her eyes slowly, disoriented and exhausted. When she finally focused on him, her expression softened into something fragile and full of emotion. "You're still here," she whispered. Keanu nodded, his voice thick. "I'm not going anywhere." She blinked slowly, her voice weak. I thought I heard you calling me." He swallowed hard. I thought I lost you." Her eyes grew glossy with tears. She moved her fingers slightly, trying to lace them with his. He helped her gently, intertwining their hands. "I'm sorry," she whispered again. He shook his head, leaning in slightly. "Please stop apologizing." She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again with effort. "I didn't want you to see me like this. I didn't want this to become your burden." His breath trembled. "You're not a burden. You never have been. If anything, I'm the one who should apologize for all the times I didn't ask how you really were." "It wasn't your fault," she murmured. He brushed his thumb gently across her knuckles. "Then please let me be here now." Sandra stared at him deeply, searching his eyes as if trying to understand something she had feared for years. "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you always there when I fall?" He took a slow breath, the truth rising painfully but unavoidably inside him. "Because I care about you more than I know how to explain, and because I can't stand the thought of you hurting alone." Her eyes widened slightly, vulnerability shining through her exhaustion. "Keanu, if I tell you the rest of the truth, you might look at me differently." He shook his head. "Nothing can change how I see you." She looked away for a moment, gathering the courage she had lost so many times before. Her breathing slowed. Her fingers tightened around his slowly. "There's something else," she whispered. "Something I didn't tell you, something I've been hiding for years, not months." Keanu felt his heart stop again. He leaned closer, gently brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "Tell me." She looked at him with fear and longing intertwined. "I didn't tell you about my condition sooner because I didn't want to change the way you treat me. But the deeper truth is—" Her breath caught. Her eyes welled with tears. She swallowed hard, voice trembling. "It wasn't just fear of losing my health. It was fear of losing you." Keanu's breath hitched sharply. Sandra looked down, ashamed. "And there's more, something from years ago, something that might change everything between us." Keanu moved even closer, desperate to understand. "What is it?" She squeezed his hand weakly, her pulse trembling beneath his fingers. "Keanu, there's someone who knows the truth already. Someone who warned me tonight that it would come out. Someone who said it's time." Keanu's eyes widened. "Who?" he whispered. But before she could answer, the door to her hospital room opened slowly. Keanu turned his head, and standing in the doorway was someone neither of them expected to see at this hour. Someone whose presence made Sandra's eyes widen in shock. Someone whose expression carried both sorrow and urgency. "We need to talk," the person said quietly, stepping inside. Keanu felt his entire body tense. Sandra's gaze filled with dread, and the monitor beside her quickened. The figure who stepped into the hospital room carried an energy that silenced the space immediately. The soft lights above flickered gently, almost sensing the shift in the air. Keanu straightened in his chair, protective instincts rising inside him like a quiet storm. Sandra's eyes widened with worry, not fear of harm, but fear of truth. She looked exhausted, fragile, vulnerable in a way she never allowed herself to be around others. But now, as this unexpected visitor stepped closer, something inside her seemed to tighten. The person stood near the foot of her bed, hands clasped, expression heavy with guilt. It was someone they both knew, someone who worked with Sandra for years, someone who had seen her hide her pain long before she admitted it to herself. Her longtime manager, Melissa. Keanu felt his breath ease slightly when he recognized her, but only slightly. The tension didn't disappear. Melissa's presence didn't bring comfort. It brought answers they weren't sure they were ready for. "I'm sorry to come at this hour," Melissa said softly, her voice trembling with sincerity. "But I think we've reached the point where things can't stay hidden anymore." Sandra closed her eyes, her breathing uneven. "Melissa, please." Keanu looked between them, confusion tightening his jaw. "What is going on?" he asked quietly, careful not to raise his voice and cause Sandra more stress. Melissa stepped forward, her shoulders slumping with emotional weight. "She didn't want you to know, Keanu. She didn't want anyone to know, and I kept her confidence because she begged me to. But tonight, when she collapsed, I realized the secret is protecting her anymore. It's hurting her." Sandra shook her head weakly, tears gathering in her eyes. I wasn't ready. Melissa looked at her with a mixture of sympathy and firmness. But you almost died tonight. You can't carry this alone anymore. Keanu leaned forward, instinctively placing a steadying hand over Sandra's. Sandra, whatever it is, we'll face it together. You don't have to hide from me. Her eyes met his, filled with longing, fear, and something deeper, something tender and fragile. She squeezed his hand lightly, grounding herself in his presence. Melissa inhaled deeply, then spoke gently but clearly. Sandra didn't develop this condition recently. She's been dealing with early signs for almost 6 years. Keanu's heart dropped. 6 years. Melissa nodded slowly. It started as small episodes, fatigue, chest pressure, dizziness, nothing severe at first. She kept working through it. She dismissed every warning her body gave her. But these past 2 years, it progressed faster. Sandra wiped a tear from her cheek, though her hand shook as she tried. I didn't want anyone to worry. I didn't want to become someone people pitied. Keanu shook his head gently, his voice low and full of emotion. I would never pity you. I respect you. I admire you, and I would have been there for you every second. Her lips trembled, and that is exactly why I stayed silent. Melissa continued softly, and there's something else, something she's been afraid to admit even to herself. Keanu turned to Sandra again. What else? Sandra's breathing grew shaky. Melissa stepped back, giving her space to speak. It was Sandra's truth to share, not hers. Sandra tightened her grip on Keanu's hand. I didn't just hide my condition because I didn't want anyone to worry. I hid it because I was afraid that if you found out, you would pull closer out of responsibility, not love, and that would hurt more than the illness. Keanu felt the air shift inside him, like everything he had wanted to say for years had suddenly risen to the surface, demanding release. He leaned in closer, his eyes soft, his voice trembling. Sandra, I never cared about you out of responsibility. I care about you because... He paused, swallowing hard. She stared at him, waiting, vulnerable in a way he had never seen her. He took a breath. Because I love you. Her eyes widened and a tear slipped down her cheek. Keanu. He continued, voice thick with truth he could no longer contain. I've loved you quietly, respectfully, patiently for years. Maybe I didn't say it out loud. Maybe I didn't know how, but I've carried it with me every day, and nothing about your condition changes that. Nothing could. Sandra covered her mouth with her free hand, overwhelmed. Her breathing trembled not from fear this time, but from release. Release of guilt, of silence, of everything she kept buried. Melissa quietly stepped out of the room, closing the door softly behind her to give them privacy. Keanu kept speaking, his voice tender and raw. I thought about telling you so many times. I stopped myself because I wasn't sure if it would make life harder for you. I didn't want to complicate your path. I didn't want to put pressure on you. Sandra lowered her hand, tears running freely. I always wondered, I always felt something, but I convinced myself I was imagining it. He shook his head. You weren't imagining anything. Her fingers tightened around his. Keanu, I was so afraid that if I told you what was happening, you would step into my pain and lose something of yourself. I didn't want to take pieces of your life to fill the empty parts of mine. I didn't want my illness to become your responsibility. He leaned forward so their foreheads gently touched. You are not a responsibility. You are someone I deeply care for, someone I want to be close to, someone whose pain I want to share, not avoid. Because love isn't about stepping back when things get hard, it's about staying. Sandra closed her eyes, letting his words melt into her heart. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to truly feel the depth of what she had held inside. After a long moment, she whispered, I love you too. Keanu froze, not in shock, but in overwhelming relief. He lifted his hand and gently cupped her cheek, wiping her tears with his thumb. She continued softly, I didn't want to admit it. I didn't want to get hurt. I didn't want to risk losing you. But tonight, when I felt myself slipping, all I could think about was how I never told you the truth. He pressed his forehead against hers again, their breaths mingling. You're not losing me, not now, not ever. She smiled weakly through her tears, a fragile, beautiful smile that held years of suppressed emotion. Then stay with me while I fight this. I don't know what the future looks like. I don't know how long this road will be, but I want you beside me if that's what you want too. Keanu's hand slid down to hold hers again. I've wanted that for longer than you know. The room grew warm, filled with the quiet glow of two hearts finally speaking the truth they feared to face. The monitor beside her beeped steadily now, as if echoing the rhythm of a new beginning. Sandra took a slow breath, this one deeper, steadier. Keanu stayed beside her, not as a friend, not as an obligation, but as someone finally allowed to love her openly. She whispered, "Tonight started with cameras catching something unexpected." Keanu smiled softly, and it ended with the truth we hid for years. Her eyes softened. "Do you think the world will understand?" "Maybe," he said. "Maybe not, but what matters is that we understand each other." She nodded gently. "That's enough." Keanu leaned down and pressed a soft kiss to her forehead, lingering there, letting the moment settle into something real, something permanent. And for the first time in a long time, Sandra felt hope. Not just for her health, but for her heart, for their future, for the life she thought she would never be brave enough to reach for. Keanu sat with her until the sunrise broke through the hospital windows, painting the room with a warm, golden light. Sandra slept peacefully, her hand still wrapped in his. He didn't let go. Not now. Not ever.